If you're not familiar with the Historical Society, we have some of our brochures back there, and we welcome you to join us. We're an all-volunteer group that works to keep the history of Laguna Beach current and up-to-date and preserved. My name's Ed Stork. I'm president of Stork. A couple other things I want to say before we go on here. We have regular meetings as a society, just like this, different topics every time. And our next one will be in January. I don't know the date right now. Probably near the end of January, but you got to get over those holidays. And it will be here, and it will be about our mission hospital here in town. And that should be very interesting. I don't know much about it myself. I'll be glad to know about that. We're an all-volunteer organization, as I said, and we invite your membership. And we'd like to have you join us. One of the events that's coming up, not just for us, but for the whole city of Laguna Beach, you can see down below, if you haven't been to our headquarters, this is our headquarters, called the Murphy Smith Bungalow, and it's on 278 Ocean Avenue between the Wells Fargo Bank and Whole Foods, Amazon Whole Foods, or whatever it's called. And we'd like you to come there, and especially this Friday night, we will be open for hospitality night. And we'll have hospitality there too, which means food and drink, and good conversation. So if you can't get over there, we were normally open from 1 to 4 p.m. every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But this week we're open Friday evening too, since it's hospitality night here in Laguna Beach. I think that's all the announcements I've got to make, and I want to go ahead and introduce our speaker so she has a time, and you'll enjoy your program, I'm sure. I've seen part of it, but not all of it. Our speaker tonight is Carol Lloyd. She's a long-time resident of Laguna Beach, and she was on our board of directors, and I believe is going to rejoin us again very soon. We're hoping to have her in the fall.
Don't brag, Carol.
Don't say no, because I already heard you say yes.
You didn't write it.
She put the ears up to or something.
I heard you say that too.
You heard it. Okay, good. The historical program tonight is about the early homesteaders of Laguna Beach. And Carol is the great-great-great-granddaughter of Henry Rogers, the 5th homesteader of Laguna Beach. Carol will be talking about her early pioneering family and how in 1873 her great-great-great-grandfather, Henry Rogers, came to Orange County from Galena, Illinois. Very interesting town on the Mississippi River, northwestern Illinois. After settling here a bit longer, he soon wrote back to his wife, Elizabeth Jane, to come in and talk. Carol will be sharing about how on April 18, 1874, Henry's wife, 44-year-old Elizabeth, arrived with 22 other family members and friends on the Transcontinental Railroad, soon setting up in Laguna Beach. I've got a whole bunch more I can tell you about her here, but I think you'd rather listen to her than to listen to me. So please, will you welcome Carol Lloyd?
Well, thank you, Ed. He's a wonderful guy, president of the board, and I want to thank the board for being here and the members of the Historical Society. My family is here, my son, raise your hand, and his son, Jacob, are you? And my sister, Barbara, and her husband, John, and they're here. And all of you are here. You know, I spoke in 2015, and I didn't really invite anybody except a few friends. And somebody said, no, you get out there and you invite your friends. So thank you so much. This room is mostly my friends. It's just wonderful. They're from all over, and I really thank you for coming and supporting me. It's really special. But tonight I'm going to be talking, and I'm going to go through slides kind of quickly if I feel like you're kind of glazing over. And I haven't taught school as many years as I have, along with other teachers in this room. We know eventually when the kids start glazing over. We just sense it. We don't even have to look at their eyes. We just sense it. So I'm going to skip through things if I feel like there's too much information. But there are always some people who want to know the details. So I have a hard time balancing that. giving details and giving general information. So, anyway, I think I thanked everybody, and I thank all of you who love Laguna history, who are from Laguna or outside of Laguna Beach right now. It's really fun. I like the historical pioneering time of our history of any town. I think it's just fascinating to see those pioneers work so hard as they did. Mostly the women who worked so hard. I'm really prejudiced with that. But I'm going to be talking tonight, and I think Johanna, this red button should work. In search of the homestead titles, the research and creation of the Laguna Beach homestead map, which was, and I'll be sharing that first because it kind of leads into everything else. And that was done by our mother, Burl Wilson Beback. And then the second is early Laguna Beach homesteaders I'll be talking about, and then the homesteaded families of Henry and George Rogers. And some of you have seen this before, so bear with me. It's always good to review. I added a little bit extra, tweaked it a little bit, so just hang in there, because it's fun history.
Good video. Try to speak in the mic.
Oh, thank you. So the first part that I'm going to share about is our mother's effort in researching tremendously and creating in the 1990s, although she spent a number of years before that researching our family history. And the homestead map that she developed is right up in front. That's the original, and she's passed on now. So I'm sharing because she wanted her story to continue in Laguna for those that appreciate Laguna history and beyond. So that's why I want to continue doing that. So this is our mother, and she did leave an incredible legacy. A number of you knew her, and she passed away, 5 years ago, Barbara? And she spoke in Laguna with her map, and this is my dad, and this is kind of what they were all about in 1994, searching out what she had heard all of her life, having family in Laguna, as a young girl and beyond, reading notes and hearing messages from her family members here in Laguna Beach about our family owning government land. And that spurred her on to find out, what does that government land mean? And really, nobody really knew. So she took it upon herself to search out different offices in this area and libraries to try to find out what that meant. But she finally went up to Sacramento with my father in the 90s, and to the offices up there, and she was just amazed at what she found. She not only found our family's name of Rogers, I'm sorry this is a little blurry, but it's Henry Rogers, our first generation. I'm the 6th generation, as is my sister, and our brother is up in Pleasanton. So the 3 of us are 6 generations. Henry Rogers is our first generation in Laguna Beach. And that is the title that was signed by Rutherford B. Hayes to have him have 160 acres on a homestead in Temple Hills all the way over to Bluebird Canyon. So I'll get back to him in just a minute because he is truthfully the originator of our family's settling here. That's Rutherford B. Hayes, who was the 19th president. And after my mother turned the microfiche wheels up in Sacramento with her husband and found that title, she was just floored. She had never heard of homesteads in our family. And she even called me on the phone and said, "Carol, you won't believe what I found." I mean, it was like gold. She had found gold. She struck gold. So what she did was, as she turned the microfiche, I can just picture her with our father standing next to her, she found another homestead, and another one, all in the same area in Laguna Beach. Nobody had ever researched this. This is all primary research. She took all those copies that they copied up there for her, and listed, this is her typewritten form, she listed every homestead title that you just saw from our family. She listed it all here, the date they were acquired, what president signed them, because the president of the current day had to sign them, and how many acres they had. And it's in 3 different sections. This is the Laguna Township, which I don't know if you can see the map, all of you, but that first section is the first township in Laguna that was homesteaded by the early pioneers. And then this is the middle one, which is Arch Beach, and that section right there is Arch Beach. And then this one is the township of Aliso. And so these are the homesteaders that homesteaded Aliso right there. So, there's so much to share with you, but I'm going to kind of back up for a minute and explain to you why did Laguna Beach get homesteaded instead of part of the Spanish ranchos. And as far as where the missions came in, why were the missions settled over in Laguna Beach? Well, at that time in 1700s, out of the 21 missions, the Spanish Empire wanted to expand, so they did do that. And they started down here in San Diego area, and they continued going up. And instead of veering left into the beach area, because of those foothills, and nobody really knows why, but all that area on the beach side, they continued on because it was a flat land. They wanted to herd their animals and plant their crops. So they wanted that flat land. So they never came over to Laguna Beach right here. They never mapped it, nothing. It was never found by the early Spanish explorers and settlers during that time. And then what happened with the homesteads in 1870, Lincoln did, and really in 1862, he passed that Homestead Act. And the Western mobilization and movement wanted to happen. They wanted to get people out here into the West. So that's where that originated. And the Homestead Act basically talks about, and it was passed by Congress, to settle the Great Plains and beyond. You had to be 21 years of age, head of the family. You could homestead 160 acres of land if you improved it within 5 years. And that's a key little point there. You had to prove up in 5 years. And you could buy it for a small amount of money, which ended up being $1.25, I believe, an acre. The U.S. government encouraged westward expansion, and the Homestead Act allowed thousands of settlers to move west and start new lives. And in the homestead years, there was 800 million acres that was settled. 600,000 claims, homestead claims during that time. So it was truthfully, it wasn't squatters. It had to be legitimate homesteaders. So it was really an incredible time to have many people come out to the West. And just to give you a window's eye, I typed this up. This was an incredible time, almost like ours of the internet and space exploration, but this in itself is amazing during this time. So we had the Pony Express, which discontinues. I'll share with you in a minute about what happened with that. And then Abraham Lincoln, of course, is president. The Civil War, there's the Homestead Act, and then Battle of Gettysburg Address, Lincoln assassinated, slavery abolished, and the Transcontinental Railroad is right in the time period that we're talking about. And then, of course, right down here, the first professional baseball league was started. That's the most important thing in that whole mess, and I know. So, getting back to my mother's map, and if we look back at that homestead area and situations, so right here is where our homestead is. Henry Rogers, and it's not as clear as I'd like it, but this being her original homestead map that she made, and I'll talk to you in a minute about that. And this being Laguna Township and Aliso Creek Township, and Arch Beach and then Aliso, all of these homesteaders. And if this were clear, she listed out every homesteader. Her handwriting was amazing, wasn't it, Barbara? And she was so proud of her handwriting. So all of this here on the original map is all of her handwriting listing all the homesteaders. She talked about the Irvine Ranch over here, which is north of Broadway. Irvine owned that, James Irvine. It was not a part of any homestead. And of course, he bought, thousands of acres of the ranchos. Right? So he had his own thing going on there. And we're selling them Beach Historical Society, as my mother would have wished, over there. So you'll actually, and we frame it like this in a simple little black frame, and it's very clear on that because this is what my mother produced from her original right here. So going on from there, and what she said, and these are her words, my mother, after researching, she said, I created this map as remembrance and homage to those 39 homesteaders and those who have gone before us, and to share my drawing and hand lettering for us who love Laguna Beach. And that's what she said, and that's what she always shared with us, and that's what she really intently wanted to do in doing that map. And so there were 39 homesteaders. She found all of them. She had the titles copied, and as a result of those titles, she plotted them all out on her map. Oh my gosh, I figure out how to do this. She plotted them all on her map and wrote them all out as over there. And I remember going over to a house and seeing her yardstick on that map and marker lining up all those lines. And she originally got a Laguna Beach commercial street map. That's what that is, and she just put it all together on top of that map. So we just are still amazed in our family to realize what she really did. So I want to talk a little bit about the first 4 homesteaders in Laguna Beach, and George Fountain was the first one, James Stirling, John Dameron, and then Lorenzo Nathaniel Brooks, who went by Nate. And those were the first 4 homesteaders. The 5th homesteader was Henry Rogers, our family. I'm not going to go through all of this, but George Fountain, he had an Indian wife. He lived where El Toro and Laguna Canyon basically are. He built a mud little cave-like structure, but there were Indians around, and his wife was an Indian. And there was the robber's cage, which some of you might have already heard about. But the robbers would rob the stagecoaches going from Los Angeles to San Diego. And they forced George Fountain's wife to bake bread for them. There was a murder out in the roads, and it really scared them to the point that they left. They did not complete their homestead, and they never returned. That's the information that we have on him. If there's more, I'm not sure about it, but that's what my mother, through all of her stories and research, found out about him. And his homestead is right in the canyon area and over there. So the next one is James Stirling.
Excuse me, Carol.
Yes.
So what happened to his property if he did enough? Did it go back, revert back to the government? And then
No, homestead property did not go back to the government. It went back to the county because the taxes probably weren't paid on it then. And I don't know what they did with it after that, but it never went back. None of the homesteads, if they didn't prove up in 5 years, went back to the government, the United States government. It just went to the county government. So what happened to his, I'm not sure, but for his property, I'm not sure. For his homestead, I'm not sure. James Stirling was the second one, and it's on her list and her microfiche title that she got. He also did not prove up his homestead. He didn't live on his homestead, which if you had a homestead, you had to have continuous living on your homestead to prove up. You couldn't live in a different location and then say that, oh, that's my homestead. You had to, as far as proving up, you had to live on it. He sold his homestead to the Rawson brothers, Cyrus and Hiram, who were the original owners of all the land that became the Moulton Ranch. And the Rawson brothers have a touch in with our family, so hang on to that. Those 2 brothers. John Dameron in 1878 was the 3rd homesteader, and his property is right down below Henry Rogers' property. You can't see it, but it's right in that area. And he homesteaded 155.5 acres of downtown Laguna. He never lived on his homestead either. He lived in Arch Cove on the cliffs and grazed his cattle behind his home. He sold his 155.5 acres to the Rawson brothers, there they go again, for $600 in gold. And within the next year or so, they sold it to our great-great-uncle, George Rogers, for $1,000 in gold. And I'll be sharing about George Rogers later. So the homesteads were a little more complex than what we think, in a way. If you have any questions, please stop and ask if you have. So Nate Brooks was the fourth homesteader, and he bought so much property that he had a hard time paying it off. And I'm sure there's stories about Nate Brooks because he is a legend in Laguna Beach and known by people in Laguna, but I don't know a lot more information than that. So let's go on to our family. I wanted to hit those quickly. This is Henry Rogers and Elizabeth Jane Wilkinson Rogers is who he married. So right here kind of helps out. My sweet friend Jane Jant suggested this. I have to bring up her name because she had such a good idea. She says, Carol, why don't you put it into a generational format so they can understand a little bit better? So here's Henry Rogers. And the blue is our direct family line. So here I am with my sister and my brother. Our mother is Burl Wilson Bebeck. Her mother is Lenore Bruneau Wilson. Her mother is Jenny Wayman Bruneau Johnson. Her mother is Mary Ann Rogers. And her father, along with George Rogers, the two children were children of Henry Rogers and Elizabeth Jane. So there's 6 generations back, and my son is the 7th generation, and his son is the 8th generation. So this is Henry Rogers. What do you think? What do you think? You look a little scary to me. Don't you think he does? Since you're all my friends, I can say
Rock
that.
and roll star.
Rock and roll star. His eyes are really penetrating. Well, that's Henry, our first generation, and he came from Galena, Illinois. That's his wife, Elizabeth. And they spelled it with an S. And Henry was a real pioneer in the sense that I'll share with you. That's his property, his homestead right there, just to give you an idea of where we are on that map on the left-hand side. And here's James Stirling. Here's Oscar Warden, who's a family member. Here's Harvey Hemingway. Here's George Fountain, that first one way up there in the canyon. And Lorenzo Brooks, Nate Brooks is right here, Henry Goff, John Cameron is right there. So it's all there on that first section of that map right there. So Henry Rogers came from Galena, Illinois, as Ed shared. And Ed is really partial to Galena because he likes it. He's from that area. Right, Ed? Okay. It's on the Mississippi River. They worked in the lead mines, we believe, in Galena, which is a foreshadowing because the health of those men was terrible, I mean, truthfully.
Yes.
Henry Rogers came from Cornwall, England, and at 18 came over with his mother, Mary, and his father, Samuel, and his brother, Richard, to the United States when he was 18. They came eventually to Galena. But Henry Rogers and many men in that area saw these signs posted, California for better health and better climate, and they were concerned about their health with the lead mines. Rightly so. So he and his brother came down on the Mississippi with a paddle wheel to New Orleans, and then got on a steamship around Cape Horn in 1873. So this is what his little journey right here with New Orleans down, and I can imagine how long it took, and up to San Francisco. They both, we believe Richard was with them, his brother. They went to Oregon for a while, then to the Sierra Gold Country, and then eventually down to Orange County. He was 51 years old. So he wrote back to his wife Elizabeth, who was 44, I believe. And he said, and this is exactly what he said, sell everything, gather as many family and friends who want to come and come. Pony Express was no longer used during that time, so this came through the Wells Fargo. I'm assuming stagecoach. So here's Elizabeth. You know, she's in, that's maybe what her home looked like. She had a 2-story home with hardwood floors, and she rubbed ash on it to make it real shiny and pretty. She was so proud of her home. And she missed it a lot when she came out here. Can you imagine? Yes. And this is kind of what maybe Galena looked like with the lead. Who knows? With the lead mines, I'm assuming they are. So it was a pretty well-established, civilized little town. But she took a train trip with 22 family and friends across the United States in the Transcontinental Railroad train. 5 5 years after it had connected with the two trains in Utah at Promontory Point, and these people were on the train. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but there were 22. Some families, some friends. They all sold their homes, they all sold their farms, they sold their personal belongings, and they came because Henry told them to come. And of course, the Transcontinental Railroad and the Spike was driven in 1869. But they came from Galena, then all the way across into Sacramento, and eventually down to Westminster, of course, right here in Orange County. And that's a closer up picture. Elizabeth rented 2 boxcars. She went economy. It was cheaper. She would have gone a higher price boxcars. It wouldn't have taken as long. But the 2 boxcars that she rented took 18 days to get across. And they stopped almost at every station on the way. That 1 boxcar held all their farm animals and barrels of Piccadilly and ham and sauerkraut and apples and the farming. The other boxcar held all 22 people with straw and their goose down feather beds and with an aisle down the middle for obvious reasons. But they did it. She did it. She was brave, tremendously brave. And of course, the Indians were not aggressive at that time, but they sure were around. So, this is a poem that somebody wrote about their trip coming across. But they finally arrived, and they stayed in Westminster for 1 year. The Edwards family, John and Thomas Edward from the Edwards Theater, eventually, they developed that. They came a year earlier than Henry from Galena, Illinois, and so he stayed with them. So here we are, and I'm going to quickly read this, but I'll go through it quickly. The second dog is Henry and his son George planted the seeds of eucalyptus trees that originally grew on Laguna Beach. George was Henry's son, and he came over on the train also. And the seeds were ordered from Australia, and Henry had planted, I should say, 2 big groves of eucalyptus on Temple Hills. And the eucalyptus tree was supposed to be a miracle tree. It was supposed to, do all kinds of wonderful things, build furniture and used to build buildings, but it buckles and it split. And as it dries out, it works. So it wasn't that miracle tree that they were hoping for. So Henry also, to prove up, he started a bee ranch on Temple Hills, right behind us, right at the top. And he built a 2-story board Latin house for Frank Goff. And some of you might have heard of Goff, for his wife and 4 children to help with the bee ranch. So that's what Henry, Generation 1, really started. Now, the next bullet point here, the homestead that the Rossum brothers bought from John Dameron, it went up for sale, and Henry offered it to his son, George Rogers. And George lived at that time in Anaheim, and he wanted to come to Laguna Beach to be with his father and mother. So he bought that John Dameron's original homestead of 155.5 acres, and he moved to Laguna. So I want to talk about George. His history is rather interesting because it deals right downtown here, and that's what he did. His sister was Mary Ann Rogers, which is our great-great-grandmother. But George and Lottie Rogers are right here. And he married Charlotte Lottie Clapper, and some of you know the Clapper name in Laguna Beach. And Mary Ann Rogers, our great-great-grandmother, married Henry Wayman. So going on from there, this is Mary Ann Rogers, our direct descendant to Henry. That's Henry's daughter, Henry and Elizabeth's daughter. And this is George Rogers, Generation 2. That's his wife, Lottie, and their first daughter, Sarah. And when they lived in Laguna, they finally had 8 children. Whoa. And when they moved back to Galena, they had 4 more. Oh. So the story about George is that he lived right where the city hall is. If you know the city hall, it used to be what they call the ranch house, and that was what he built, was the ranch house. So George, since he bought the downtown homestead from initially John Dameron and then the Rossum brothers, he wanted to make that into a little town. He always wanted that downtown area to be a town. So he and his wife, their homestead, whoops, I'm sorry about that misspell, but it went Canyon Acres Road in the canyon, down to 3rd, up to Mystic Hills, out to Park Drive, and then out to the Pacific Ocean. It then went north to the slough where Broadway ends, then along the slough, back east, back up to the Canyon Acres Road where the Sawdust Festival is. That is an amazing piece of property. That was 155 and a half acres. And why it's down 160, I don't know. George went on to build that board and batten house where the city hall is. And while it was being built, he lived with the Harvey Hemingway family out in the canyon. And some of you might know the Harvey Hemingway family. And the lumber that George used for his house, he had to take his horse and wagon to Anaheim Landing, which is where Seal Beach is now, and he had to go on the boat. He had to take the logs out, the lumber off, and put it in his wagon and drive back through the Irvine property. I mean, it was not easy at all during that time. That's a picture of what that ranch house looked like, where the city hall is. And when it was finished, here's some more pictures that I have. And so, Henry, his father, moved his board and batten house down 3rd Avenue right here on skids with wheels underneath it and rolled his 2-story little board and batten house down and hooked it on and put it onto his son's George. Yes.
Carol, would you go back a slide, please? Is that the original pepper tree?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the pepper tree that's still there.
Yes. Partially here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have pictures. We'll talk about that. Thank you. His father gave George his house from Temple Hills because the family was growing. And that house that Henry built for Frank Goff was now empty. And they eventually connected the 2 structures, making the kitchen larger, adding another little room and a dining room, as 4 more children were born while they lived in Laguna. And so now there was room for 8. So if you can imagine that city hall being a ranch house, I just can't imagine that. I'd love to have been there during that time just to feel it. It would be exciting. And that's another picture of it. And that's pretty, isn't it? That pepper tree is right there. So where that pepper tree stands in the entrance into City Hall is really kind of where that ranch house was. And if you go into the City Hall, as you might know already, on the right-hand side is a painting done by Roy Rock of the ranch house. So if you go to the City Hall and look to the right, I took a picture of it, it's right there. So, and that's the picture, of course, up close. So, this is what my mother put together. But his daughter, Lizzie, his oldest daughter, and George planted that pepper tree in front of their ranch house in 1882. And pepper trees don't live very long. Well, I don't know how long they do live, but it was up much longer than it should have been. It had concrete in on the inside. They tried to save it. It was a liability in the end. And as you might know, there were a lot of back and forth meetings about it. So eventually, though, that tree, and there's another picture of it. I think that's really pretty. That's what it used to look like.
Yeah.
And that's a historic tree. Then it started getting cut down in the middle of the day. And I don't think anybody knew what day they were cutting it down for obvious reasons. And now that's what it looks like now. And you'll see the lights on it right now at nighttime. So, since he purchased that homestead, he always wanted to start a little town, so he hired a surveyor, Steele Finley, who was very well known, and he named George Rogers, second generation. He named Forest Avenue and Ocean Avenue. He named Forest because it was full of his eucalyptus trees that he planted with his father, Henry, and he named Ocean Avenue because he could see the ocean from his house. He also wanted to add Mermaid and a few other streets to his subdivision. So in this year, the addition of these streets took place also. So the 2 subdivision areas combined with 323 lots, and it was called the Rogers Addition by the county. So if you ever see a plat map of the downtown area, you'll see Rogers Addition on there. And during the same period, he named Forest, and as I just shared. So he went on to scraping the downtown streets with his team of horses and even the street that paralleled the beach, which eventually became Coast Highway in 1926. He sold a number of his lots to his family members and also to Nate Brooks, who bought a lot on the waterfront on the boardwalk for $50. And Jarris's, who bought the land that the Laguna Beach Lumberyard is on right now, where the Lumberyard restaurant is, in 1910. And George also sold many lots, including the ranch house, to his niece, Ora Warling, and her husband, Oscar Warling, which later became a laundry on Forest Avenue. So he sold these lots. This is his subdivided Rogers Addition lot. And I have it hanging up over there also. But this is Forest Avenue right here. This is Ocean. And this is where we are, basically right here, and this is where the city hall is. So it's a triangle, isn't it? I mean, it's just really a triangle. He had this area first, I believe, and then he added this. And I don't have all of my facts exactly correct sometimes. I'm sure you guys know more than I do, so you'll have to bear with me. But I think our mother did so much research that I'm sharing with what mostly she has shared. And this is a closer look. So he had 323 lots that he subdivided, and that's what it looks like.
A lot of those lots stayed in the families.
Well, there were a number of the lots that have stayed in our family, and my cousin twice removed. We share the same great-grandmother, Ora Warling. They bought, and I'll share with you in a minute, what they have still in their family. Let's see, Forest, there's Broadway, there's Ocean, and Forest is right here. They have a lot, let's see, where's the Laguna Beach Presbyterian Church? I think it's right here. Their lot is 334 Forest Avenue, right here, and it goes all the way to Ocean. George Rogers sold that to his niece, Ora Warling, Mary's daughter, and she gave it, I'm jumping ahead. But this is, I have some pages that look like this that says the transfer of ownership to all of those lots over time. It's not supposed to be read. It's small enough, but bottom line, there's an indication of all the records. This is a little bit later, but this is kind of what it could have looked like. Isn't that wilderness?
Can you point out what street is what?
No. I don't really. Jane, do you know?
That's probably Broadway.
Jane,
The white building.
this one?
That must be Broadway.
That one.
Yeah. That's
That's the area of where
that could be where the laundry was right there.
that brown building became the Presbyterian Church.
Yeah, that's where the church.
Is that the little church, as they call it, the brown little church?
Yeah.
So do you think this is Forest then?
Definitely Forest.
And I don't know what year this is. Do you have any idea? Jane is our on-site wonderful historian. Okay. I don't mean to put you on.
1921, I know that.
Okay. Thank you. Isn't that incredible? I know. They're all those. And this is the slough, which is coming from two lakes in a canyon at that time, and that was on a dividing line between Broadway and George Rogers' downtown. And that slough has caused a lot of problems, as you can see. In 1926, the flooding, and this is a beautiful, I love this of downtown Laguna, way back with Joseph Pike. And so George went with his family back to Crooksville, Missouri, because his house was so bad. The doctor told him, "You got to get those lungs figured out, otherwise you won't live very much longer." So he went back, and he never moved back to Laguna, but they did return back to Orange County. And after spending time in the Midwest farming land, and he died in 1934 and 81, and then his wife, Aunt Lottie, moved back to Laguna Beach, which she really did love, and she died at 92. She always thought Laguna Beach was a jumping off point because it was definitely not Galena, but she loved it enough to want to come back to her family and live here. just a little bit more. So Ora Warling is generation 3, and that is George and Lottie's daughter. And this is her sister, Jenny Wayman Johnson, which is our great-grandmother. These were sisters, and they married brothers. And her husband died, John Bruno, and her husband, they divorced. Happened way back then, too. So if you notice, then here's Ora, third generation, and their mother was Mary Rogers. Jenny and Mary and Ora, those were her 2 daughters. And Jenny married, after divorcing her first husband, she married A. Johnson the first, who was the first chief of police in Laguna Beach. And his son, A. Johnson Jr., was also the chief of police in Laguna. And Ora married Oscar Warling. And that means they bought some property from George, downtown Laguna, George. Then Jenny's daughter is Lenore, that's my grandmother, and her daughter is Earl, and that's my mother, and there we are. So that's kind of how that works out. And here's Ora in the middle. Here's our great-grandmother Jenny Johnson. 2 of those are sisters. That's my grandmother. This is Lola, who is Ora's daughter. A little bit about Lola. Lola ended up having the laundry built by her stepfather, Oscar Warling. And this is where the Forest Avenue Mall is that my cousin Terry Robbins, twice removed, owns that property, because that's where their laundry was. So it just continued to go on down through the family, and that's what the laundry used to look like when it was there at that spot. We want to know exactly where it is, don't we, Barbara? We want to know exactly the footprint of that laundry on Forest Avenue. And how we're going to figure that out, I really don't know. I don't know. That's Lola in that. Lola is my great-grandmother's sister's daughter. And it's a little confusing, but that's what it is. That's our mother's handwriting. She had tents to sleep in. She was married to Robbins. Last name? Robbins. Jane, help me out. Orange. Oh, no, that's her son. She was married to Elmer Robbins, and she had 1 son, but Elmer died at a young age, and so she raised that Orrin Robbins all by herself and eventually married John Lucas. But anyway, that little laundry was built for her, and that's kind of a bird's eye view of it right there. So they went all the way back to Ocean because she got her uncle to sell her that lot way back then. This is what that little laundry looked like inside. It's hard to tell what this is, but the Jarvis Lumberyard gave them filings and sawdust to put in their big tanks of water to light for the laundry. And that's the tent where her son lived in, and that's her tent. And so it's just a really fun story about them. Our great-grandmother Jenny Johnson, that's A. Johnson the first, chief of police of Laguna. And then the only last thing is the Warling House, which is still in existence on Diamond Avenue, and Barbara Diamond lives in it. So Ora Warling and her husband Oscar Warling lived in the sandwich mill right at PCH and Forest. I think that's an ice cream place now. And they moved that house because the city wanted to put in the Coast Highway. So that's my grandmother, and that's my mom and dad at a young age before they even got started on their search. So that's it. That's a lot. I used that really well. I could have gone on for another hour.
So how rich are you?
Not our property.
You didn't get anything out of all that?
I don't know. Did we get anything? No, I don't. We did get something, but not from this family. Yeah, that's another story. We don't have time for that. But the 2 sisters, our great-great-grandmother Jenny and her sister Ora. Jenny did not buy property from her uncle. Ora did when he subdivided 320 lots. So she was a smart woman, but then she gave it to her daughter Lola, and Lola gave it to her son, Orrin, and Orrin got married to Teresa, and they now have Terry, who must be 60 or so. I talked to him quite a bit. But, and they live up in Grass Valley. They don't even live down here.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, well, I don't think there's any other property in our family. There's more to what happened to those titles as time went on, but I could follow those as time goes on. But the ranch house ended up getting sold to Oral Orling. She bought that too with her husband Oscar, and they lived there. And then the Women's Club leased it out, and then they eventually bought it, the Women's Club here in Laguna Beach. But then the city wanted that property, and they basically forced the Women's Club to sell it to them. And the Women's Club said you can do everything except don't take that pepper tree down. In the transaction, it said that. But that pepper tree became a liability. And it was wonderful because they saved some trunks and limbs for us from that pepper tree, and we had them made into little bowls and carved. George Rogers and his daughter Lizzie planted this in 18 whatever, so that was sweet of them to do that. The city did that for us, and I appreciate that. Yes?
Do you know if the Rogers family had any association or relationship to the Rogers Point, which is at Three Arch Bay in South Laguna?
Well, I've been asked questions like that before, and there were so many Rogers here in the 1910s and 20s after they all came here that I have a feeling that when you hear that, it probably might be related, but I can't verify that. Right. And a lot of them went back to the Midwest. So, and then some states
go back.
Well, because of his health, and he couldn't get rid of all those lots. He couldn't, it was Depression time in a sense in that he put in a lot of money to get that survey done with Still Finley. And his father, even Henry, had to, I think he sold Temple Hills his thing just to help pay for that survey and all that development of those lots. To the extent that he just ran out of money, maybe, but mainly it was his health.
Let's make sure we get the microphone over there.
Oh,
Let me test this one out here. Oh, yeah, I was gonna say, you don't have to stick it on there, that would have the whole thing.
now you tell me. I wish I had all the answers for you guys, so if you ask me something and I don't, I'm just going to say, I don't know. But maybe somebody else would.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. When your mother in the 1980s was found the microfiche in
1994.
1994 and made the map, she had information on microfiche, but how difficult was it to line up the current, to actually line it all up and where it was and all that?
She was amazing in that sense because she would look at every title. Let me see if I can have a picture of a title in person. She would line up every title and get the numbers off of it. She figured out how to, and this was just a city map. That's all that is. That's nothing fancy, and it didn't have anything on it beforehand. So she looked at, like, here's a copy of one of the titles. And I think my sister and I were always amazed at her intelligence and ability to do so much more beyond what I think we could do. But she would look at the points and the plot lines, and she would figure that out. Maybe she asked people, but, and being that this is the original, and she says down here, this map is for placement of homesteads. Boundary lines will have inaccuracies. Even the hired surveyors cannot find all the original legal stakes. She wrote that, and that's a disclosure in her own handwriting right there. But she did the best she could to figure out those lines. And even way over, and there's 39. There's one woman, and that was a Goff. And she had one of the homesteads. Other than that, they were all men. Here's George Thurston's homestead right there where the ranch is right now. And the Goffs own a few of them. Lulu is the only woman, and hers is right down here on the water. Jesus.
Any other questions? I actually have one. We hear this a lot. I think I know the answer, but I would rather you say it and clear this up if you know anything about it. You mentioned it was the Homestead Act that your family came in on, and everybody back then used that act signed by Abraham Lincoln, but people often refer to the Timber Culture Act. Do you know if Laguna had anything to do with that? Was any of our property given out under that
Well,
act?
I have some information on that Timber Act, and it mainly dealt with planting trees, I believe. I have it at home. In fact, I was going to bring it because I thought somebody would ask that question. But it's not, and on his homestead title, it will say on there timber or homestead. And all of them were homesteads and not Timber Act. So the coding on here shows that difference. And because somebody had asked me that before, and I looked at a lot of them, and it was like homestead, not timber. So I don't know really what that difference is.
But those all said homestead, so that
Yeah, they were all
Makes it
homestead.
clear.
There might have been one or two that were timber, but I don't know the difference. It would be something that, you could Google and find out, I'm sure. Yes.
Should I see that document?
Let's get the microphone to the recording.
here, go ahead.
Can I see the document, please?
It's like a quiz show.
I'm a licensed surveyor, and it's just kind of interesting to take a look at these old documents. And I live out in Dove King, and one of our board of directors was the Orange County Fire Authority was said you got to clear the area up to here, and got an original map and found an original survey marker in 1917. So these things are real. This is a real deal. These things here, it's like how they wrote them, and they're a legal document today. So it's pretty powerful stuff.
Carol,
Yes.
a question. Are you or your sister or any of your other family members going back any further, like to Europe and your family history? Anybody working to go any farther back?
Well, on our mother's side, it goes back to England, and we have some trails back there, Cornwall, but not as it relates to Little Beach.
Okay.
I mean, there might be Rogers back there like crazy, and the Turtle side might be Shepherd, or might be, we have a few trails back there.
It takes a lot of work, I'm sure.
Yeah,
to
it
do
does.
that, and a lot of time.
Yeah, and my sister's doing quite good at that.
Did you have something earlier, one of you?
Actually, two real quick questions. The first police chief, what year? When you had a police chief?
I'm sorry?
You said Abe
Abe
Johnson was
Johnson.
the first police chief. Do you know what year they had the first police chief here?
Let's see, when? Maybe I don't know, James, 1920s, maybe? I don't.
Because the city was incorporated in 27. I'm wondering whether it was
27,
before then or
so it had
after
to be
that.
after that, then, didn't it?
You think, I don't know. That's what I was wondering whether it was before.
Your
I don't
mom
know.
was just a kid.
Yeah. And we have pictures of him standing on the corner right near the boardwalk, but it might have the data. We have it, but I just couldn't put everything up there.
And the other question, how far south does that map go? Does that go to like Three Arch Bay?
How far? It goes down into the Molten Ranch area to the ocean, but I'd say Three Arch Bay is the end, and Napoleon Wilson and 1889 was at Homesteaded.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Hold on.
You know the train cars that your great-great-grandmother, she had to rent them out?
The boxcars on the train. She had to
I know in the Midwest, they used to have what they called the Homestead train, where everybody could bring one bed and one dining room set and one sewing machine.
Oh.
And I just didn't know if they had that same arrangement all the way to the West Coast or not.
Well, all I know is what my mother wrote, and what she wrote was what she researched a lot. So I'd say the Transcontinental Railroad, if the Homestead train was from the Transcontinental Railroad, fine, but the Union Pacific and the Coast train meeting, I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe, but I know that she rented 2 boxcars, and they weren't open to anybody else except for 22 people. And
So
a
it
farming.
might have been government subsidized, right?
Yeah. They couldn't afford the more, the higher end boxcars.
spot, but I love this part of the story. I heard it from other sources, and I don't know the detail, but you touched upon the idea that somebody started the homestead and then did not finish it. And I know that there was a process that they had to do, and I think at the very end, the last person to go file the final paperwork was called the journeyman. Is that right?
Oh, I don't know.
And I've heard little bits of this story, but I don't have the full knowledge of it. Do you have any other knowledge of what that process was?
If those first 4 homesteaders, out of a few of them, if you didn't finish your homestead in 5 years, if you bought your homestead, if you bought that homestead and it was only 3 years into it, you only had 2 years then to prove up. You didn't start all over again with 5 years to get a big ranch or plant trees, whatever was left over, like when James Stirling and they left their homestead, even George at the beginning. When they left their homestead early and didn't finish living in it, George Fountain, and if he had 2 years left on that homestead out of the 5 to prove up, then whoever got that only had 2 years. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I think there are many different ways to do it, like that's I think what you're suggesting. I think there were people that could actually buy it out and didn't have to even.
You could buy it for $1.25 an acre. If you didn't want to prove up, you could buy it for $1.25. And like Lorenzo Brooks, he did not have the money to complete it, to buy it, to finish it, because he kept wanting to.
I'm sure each family, each person has a different story, and each property has a different story as to how it finalized.
Yeah. And who monitored that? That'd be interesting to find out that. You know, like the ones who did not live on it continuously, instead they lived in Arch Cove. How did they do that without being checked out? It's really interesting, that time period.
Any other questions that you would like to?
Do you know how they determined who got what homestead, what area?
Well, the homesteads went on into the 1900s, and the further along it finally finished, and the properties weren't as desirable. So even the Goffs only got 40 acres of a homestead.
But did they get to pick where they wanted to be?
Well, I'm not sure how they picked their own homestead, but the pickings got kind of less and less as all of them were taken. So, I mean, the good ones downtown Lynn on the beach, those were nice. The canyon was maybe a little rough, but, yes.
You said these folks came from Bermuda and they ended up in San Francisco area, which is not Laguna Beach. How did they get down to Laguna Beach?
Well, Henry came down Cape Horn and up to San Francisco, and then from there, within that time period, short time period, traveled to Oregon, and then Sierra Gold Country, and then came down to Orange County. He didn't stay in those places for a long time. He visited
They
them.
could have come down by ship or
Yeah, he came down by ship.
What?
It wasn't a fancy car, no. What? Yeah, San Pedro, and then they picked him up in San Pedro with the Edwards brothers, John and his brother Thomas.
No.
No. What a nice audience they have been. I'm not saying that most of them are friends. I said, please smile. So I can run home.
Any other questions you may have?
Good, Carol.
We want to thank Carol.
The Carol brought along some of the maps, the one you see on that side, and they are for sale. $40? Okay, good. $40 are for sale, and they're original documents, obviously made by her mother. And we, in the Historical Society, thank you all for coming tonight. We're glad to see you. I hope we see you Friday night at the bungalow down there, or some Friday, Saturday, Sunday between 1 and 4 p.m. We're open. We have volunteers to show people around, and it's a very historic place. I think you'd enjoy seeing. And if there's nothing else for the good of the group, we'll adjourn. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.